having failed to beat the Israelis on the battlefield, they used every other means available to destroy the Jewish state. I mean, that's their ultimate goal, and they know that if they create a Palestinian state, they really don't want a Palestinian state. What they want is the destruction of the state of Israel. They say this over and over again, and when I hear people talk about the concept of a two-state solution, that will happen in the same way that if I sit in my home on December 25th as an Orthodox Jew waiting for Santa Claus to come down the chimney. It ain't going to happen. From the very beginning, they have made it very clear that they don't want a two-state solution. They want the destruction of Israel. They say it in word, and they do it in deed. I can't tell you that I've heard anything, but I think, as I said, it's always on the back burner. When they feel that that it's to their advantage, they will bring it back again. They tried with, in November of 1975, with Zionism equals racism. That effort succeeded, and then it failed, but the idea is that the concept still is pervasive throughout the world. So the idea of a separate state declared by the UN is still very much alive. It's a question of tactics for them. They have a whole bunch of different weapons in their arsenal, and they bring them out depending upon when they feel it is the best approach. Right now, there's no point in it. It's in abeyance. At the United Nations, there's a certain irony that it was created specifically out of the ashes of the Holocaust in order to protect the Jewish people, and they're the body that declared in 1948 and then in 1949 to give the Jewish state membership in the United Nations, which meant that they gave it legitimacy, they gave it legality, international legality, and over years, it has become a vehicle to undermine not only Israel, but the West. And that happened as a result of more and more nations coming into being accepted as members, and the Arabs playing a more important role, particularly after the oil embargo became a major issue. And they were able to use their money and their influence to buy votes. It's become a very corrupting institution. When you have Libya and other major Arab countries that degrade women, prevent them from living a normal life in the way that we have in the West, they can't vote, they're chattel. These are the countries that are sitting on the Human Rights Committee, and it's simply absurd. It's a perversion of what was supposed to have been. This institution was there to help humanity, and the opposite has happened. And that's why when I wrote a book, Nations United, How the UN Undermines Israel in the West, the purpose is now precisely that. How do we destroy our democratic way of life? And that's why this is an issue not only for Jews, but for Christians and for anybody who is interested in democracy. I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding about the legitimacy of Israel. Was not only in 1948 and then 1949, but its roots go back to the 1920s with the San Remo Convention, where there was clearly a discussion and a determination and a treaty, the San Remo Treaty, to legitimize the state of Israel, the Jewish state. It's one of the most legal institutions, countries that's ever been established. Far more right to exist in the United States or many of the other countries in Europe. And after the war, the Allies sat down and said, how are we going to divide up what was then the Ottoman Empire? And one of the meetings that they had was at San Remo, and they made this treaty which gave legitimacy ultimately to the state of Israel. I think the problem that we have, anytime we state the legitimacy of Israel, we have to go back to 1917 with the Balfour Declaration and the San Remo, treaty, then with the League of Nations and their agreements that were made, and then finally in the UN. There is an attempt to divert people from the legality and legitimacy of Israel to point out right now that we need, well, look at all of these other things, the settlements, the whatever else they're complaining about at the time. It's an apartheid state. If we did look at it from a legal perspective, and people don't want to look at it legally, because then they would see that Israel has a greater right to exist than most countries in the world today. And so that's why it's in order to divert people from the historical truth and the legal truth of the legitimacy of the State of Israel. And so if I were an Arab who opposed Israel, the last thing I would want to bring is this whole litany of reasons why there is a legitimacy to Israel that doesn't exist for a Palestinian entity. The whole question of Palestine and the name is very controversial, but what we do know is that it has nothing to do with the present group of people living there. And that's the key issue, whereas we know that the Jews have historically been there. The Arabs who came afterwards, yes, there was a small indigenous population, but Palestine was not a country. It was connected to Syria, and it was a backwater area that few people had any concern with. The only issue there was taxes. How do we get taxes? But it was not kept up, and only it became an issue when the Jews started coming in and developing the land, and Arabs from other areas came in because it was very lucrative for them. So the whole idea of this distortion of history, that there is a Palestinian people that were there years ago for centuries, that had their own identity, is simply made up. Even when you look at Palestine, the word Palestine, it doesn't even have any connection with the people today. So it's again an attempt to distort and convince people about something that simply never existed. It's a brilliant move. I mean, they know how to manipulate the media. They know how to manipulate with their victimhood, which is simply absurd. But we have to be smarter than that. We have to go back and look at the origins and say to ourselves what is truth and what's not. Because once we understand the truth, we realize that a lot of what they do is like a magician. They're fooling us. And if you look behind and you see the ways in which they're doing it, all of a sudden it becomes, are you kidding me? These people have no legitimacy. There's no right to what? Yeah, well, here's another example of they're related to every group that's ever been in Israel, in the land of Israel, but let them prove it. The question I always have is, they say that their origins were in the past. Where is the documentation? Show me. I want to see from an archaeological perspective, that they can prove their point. Instead of trying to berate us and say, yes, we were there, that's not an answer. Where is the proof? Where is the documentation? Where is the legitimacy to what you're telling us? They throw so many things at you with the idea that hopefully something will stick. What are they saying? Why do they say it? And where's the documentation? Where is the proof to show that this is the case? Just like when they claim settlements. What does that mean? There were no settlements before 67, yet they still wanted to kill Jews. One of the things that people do not know is that during the Second World War, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem went to Germany, where he did everything he could to urge his followers to sabotage, first of all, the West. He wanted the Allies to lose the war. So he was against democracy. He was against everything that we stand for. He wanted to destroy Britain. He wanted to destroy the United States. So that's the first issue. Secondly, he collaborated with he encouraged Hitler to kill Jews. And he wanted them to kill the 6 million Jews, and he wanted them then to go into the Middle East and to kill all of the Jews there. So here is a man who was anti-democratic, who hated the West, and he hated the Jews. Why? Because the Jews represented everything that was positive for our way of life. Actually, there are a couple of books that have come out in recent times about a number of Muslims who were protective of the Jews in their various communities. And that's very important to understand, that sometimes we try to put everybody in the same boat, and that's a mistake on every level. So there were, Martin Gilbert wrote a book on the subject, Robert Satloff wrote a book on the subject, two very good books on the documentation of individuals who helped Jews. Actually, it was very interesting that they were able to find people in Muslim countries that would actually admit to the fact, but these were their neighbors, these were their friends, these are people that they felt they had to protect. It was part of their, and what they claim is this was part of their religious heritage, that they had to help. Unfortunately, they were the minority. Most Jews were thrown out, their property and whatever else they had were confiscated and taken away from them. The interesting thing is that this is an area that few people understand. We always focus on the Arab refugees that were part of a war. Many of them left on their own volition. They feared, and also because this was in the midst of a war. Let's face it, that's what happens with refugees. The Jews who were living in Arab countries were forced out, anywhere the numbers between 800 and a million, I don't even know exactly what it was, but anywhere between 800 and a million plus were thrown out of their country. Not because there was a war, but because they were Jews and because of the establishment of the State of Israel. There's a very big difference between refugees of a war and people who were thrown out of their citizens of their own country who were forced out during a time when there was no conflict in those areas. I think one area that people do not understand is the attachment of the Jews to the land of Israel. And this is an area that really is so fundamental. Being attached to land means that every day an Orthodox Jew, a traditional Jew I should say, says 3 times a day to return us to the land of Israel. V'Yerushalayim yircha b'rachamim tashuv, please return us to Jerusalem. I would never say never, but I ask any of the students I work with a question. Where have the Arabs ever said in their political, in their religious, or any other, or media pronouncements that they accept the existence of a Jewish state? I see everything just the opposite. I did a paper on why is this an intractable conflict, and the answer is, from the minute that the Jews talked about coming back to their homeland, of reestablishing themselves in their homeland, the Arabs have fought tooth and nail. There has never been any Arab that has said, I agree with the two-state solution. Okay? From the time it was instituted, the time it was suggested in the Peel Commission of 1937, in July of 1937, nothing has been done except to fight it in every way possible. So if somebody out there can tell me where the documentation is, where the statements in any of the media, the political or religious pronouncements, or any of the behavior, I would be thrilled to see it, and I will change my view. But right now, everything is just the opposite. We have to be delusional not to see it. The threat that we face today in Israel is not a threat only to the Jewish people, but to all Christians, all lovers of democracy. Make no mistake about it, whatever theological differences we have pale by comparison, because we see that in Bethlehem and throughout the Middle East, they want to destroy Christianity. They want to destroy Judaism. I don't know how many times Jews and Christians have to be killed before we understand it. Okay? That's the problem. And these are radicals, but that's what they believe, because they believe that what we believe in is heresy, and either we convert or we die. And if we don't get it, it's going to be too late. And that's why we have to band together. I don't care what you believe. You don't care what I believe. There's somebody shooting at us. There's somebody fighting us. And if we want to sit and talk about differences while somebody is attacking us, there has to be something wrong with us. And as somebody once said correctly, if there's a question about Jesus, when he returns, we'll ask, is this your first or second time? Leave me alone already.
You just learned a portion of the truth about the world's most volatile region, the world's most demonized country, and the 2,000-year hatred of a people that have survived despite the odds. From studying history, it's very clear that what starts with the Jews never ends only with the Jews. We must strongly stand against any anti-Semitic trends, for if not stopped, they'll cause harm to all of us, and we'll witness the downfall of our Judeo-Christian Western culture. Today, many people say there's no longer a need for a Jewish state, that Jews around the world no longer need a place of refuge. But anyone who has heard recent statistics about the worldwide rise in anti-Semitism would never make such a claim. The reality is that neo-Nazi groups and Nazi sympathizers are increasing around the world. Surveys show that over 1 billion people in the world harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. Close to 50% believe that Jews have too much power in the business world, and 2/3 of the world's population has never heard of the Holocaust, or believe the historic accounts of it are inaccurate. If there's one thing history has taught the Jewish people, a place they can go in time of need is essential, and Israel fulfills that role. But the need for a Jewish state is not limited to being only a refuge for Jews. Jewish tradition in Israel grants full rights for women and people of all races, faiths, and gender. This tradition is what often makes Israel among the first countries to send doctors and field hospitals to any place where a natural disaster occurs, utilizing their medical advances to save lives worldwide. Muslims, Christians, and people of every faith, or those of no faith, have the freedom to worship or not worship as they choose. For Muslims, the Jewish state goes out of its way to provide this freedom. For example, every Israeli university gives students the option of deferring their exams during the month of Ramadan. The Knesset calls off all sessions at sunset during Ramadan to ensure that Muslim Knesset members can break their fasts with the traditional iftar dinner. In an open and democratic manner, opportunities for education, advancement, and careers exist for all citizens in the Jewish state. Sadly, such rights and opportunities do not exist in any of the Muslim Arab states. For example, in neighboring Jordan, Jews cannot become citizens. And in Saudi Arabia, no non-Muslim can become a citizen. Saying that Israel must cease to exist as a Jewish state while accepting that other countries define themselves as Muslim is pure hypocrisy. In most of these countries, no rights exist for non-Muslims, women, and the LGBT community. Don't let yourself be manipulated by evil people with a wicked agenda. When the self-serving villains are in control, good people from all religions suffer. Muslims, Christians, and all people of conscience should stand proudly and show respect for a country that gives so much to the world in so many ways. Do your part, do your research, and do what you can to make a difference. Because what happens in Israel does affect us all. This is not just a Jewish or just an Israeli problem. This is a problem for all humanity, for each and every one of us who believe in freedom and human rights. Learn more about what you can do at pjtn.org.